She paid for his law degree, and his repayment was a public humiliation over her dress size. Chad left Penelope weeping in a 5-star restaurant, claiming he needed a woman who fit his new corporate image. He didn't know the city's oldest, most lethal predator was watching them both. The chandeliers at Le Bernardin cast a cold, diamond-hard light over the dining room. Penelope Rousseau sat frozen, her trembling fingers hovering over the untouched seared scallops. Across the table, Chad Montgomery adjusted his silk tie, a tie Penelope had bought him for his first mock trial. "I'm just trying to be realistic." "Penny," Chad said, his voice carrying that measured, patronizing tone he usually reserved for cross-examinations. He didn't even have the decency to lower his voice. The couple at the next table briefly glanced over before aggressively returning to their wine. "I'm on the fast track to partner at the firm. The partners host galas, retreats, charity balls. The wives there, they have a certain look, a certain discipline." Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. "Discipline," she whispered. "Look at yourself." Chad sighed, leaning back and gesturing vaguely at her body. "You've let yourself go. You're what, a size 14 now. It's not healthy, and frankly, it doesn't align with the brand I need to project. I need someone who looks good in a size 4. Someone who actually cares about their appearance." The sheer cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. For 3 years, Penelope had worked double shifts bartending until 2 a.m. and freelancing as a graphic designer by day to pay Chad's tuition at Columbia Law. She had cooked his meals, formatted his briefs, and survived on cheap takeout while she bought him tailored suits. The weight she had gained was a direct result of the chronic stress and sleep deprivation she endured to build his future. "You're breaking up with me," she choked out, her vision blurring with hot, stinging tears. "Tonight, our anniversary," Chad signaled the waiter for the check. "I'm sorry, Penelope. I've actually been seeing someone from the firm. Jessica. She's a junior associate. We just fit better. I'll reimburse you for the rent this month." He stood up, dropped a $100 bill on the pristine white tablecloth, and walked out. He didn't look back. Penelope sat in stunned silence for a full minute before the humiliation fully set in. Gathering her coat, she fled the restaurant, pushing past the heavy glass doors and out into the biting November night. The sky opened up, unleashing a torrential, freezing downpour. She didn't bother looking for a cab. She just walked, her tears mixing with the icy rain, her expensive heels sinking into the puddles of Midtown Manhattan. Every word Chad said echoed in her mind, tearing at her already fragile self-esteem. She wrapped her coat tighter around her curvy frame, feeling utterly monstrous, completely unlovable. She walked for miles, losing track of time and direction, her numb feet carrying her away from the crowded avenues and into the quiet, hyper-exclusive enclaves of the Upper East Side. The streets here were lined with historic townhouses, shrouded in shadow, and ivy completely devoid of foot traffic. She finally collapsed onto a wrought-iron bench beneath a flickering street lamp, burying her face in her hands, her sobs racking her shivering body. "A woman as breathtaking as you shouldn't be weeping in the rain." The voice was deep, resonant, and smoothed with an unidentifiable ancient accent. Penelope gasped and looked up. A sleek, midnight black Maybach had pulled up silently to the curb. Standing before her, holding a massive silver-handled umbrella, was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a dark, romantic era. He was toweringly tall, dressed in an immaculate, charcoal bespoke suit. His raven hair was swept back, framing a face of aristocratic, terrifying perfection. But it was his eyes that locked her in place. They were a piercing, luminescent shade of amber, glowing faintly in the gloom. I'm fine," Penelope stammered, instinctively crossing her arms over her stomach to hide her body Chad's venomous words, still fresh in her mind. The man tilted the umbrella, shielding her from the rain. He didn't look at her with pity, Nor did he look at her with the dismissive judgment she was so used to. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated hunger. "You are freezing, Penelope," he said softly. Her breath hitched. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things," he replied, extending a pale, flawlessly manicured hand toward her. "My name is Dominic Croft, and I have been waiting a very long time for the parasite you call a boyfriend to finally step aside. Come with me. Let me treat you the way a goddess deserves to be treated." Penelope knew she should run. Everything about him screamed danger. But the warmth radiating from him, the absolute reverence in his amber eyes drew her in. Trembling, she placed her hand in his. His skin was freezing cold, yet an electric jolt shot up her arm at the contact. Dominic effortlessly pulled her to her feet and guided her into the opulent, leather-scented warmth of his car. The drive north was a blur of rain-slicked highways and silent luxury. Dominic offered her a plush cashmere blanket, which she wrapped tightly around her shivering frame. He didn't press her for conversation. He simply poured her a glass of impossibly rich, dark red wine from the car's compartment. The drink instantly warmed her blood, settling her frayed nerves. An hour later, the Maybach passed through a set of towering wrought-iron gates, adorned with wolf crests deep in the secluded woods of the Hudson Valley. They drove up a winding, tree-lined driveway until an awe-inspiring Gothic Revival mansion loomed into view. It was a fortress of dark stone ivy and glowing stained-glass windows, standing defiant against the storm. Dominic escorted her inside. The foyer was a masterpiece of old-world wealth, soaring vaulted ceilings, mahogany paneling, and a roaring fire in a massive stone hearth. Yet it was completely silent. There were no maids, no butlers. "My staff retired for the evening," Dominic murmured, noting her confusion. He led her to a luxurious guest suite. "There are dry clothes in the armoire. Draw a bath. Warm yourself. I will have dinner prepared for you." When Penelope emerged 30 minutes later, wearing a sweeping emerald-green silk robe she had found in the closet, she felt like a different person. The silk draped beautifully over her curves, clinging to her full hips and waist, in a way that made her feel unexpectedly elegant. She followed the scent of roasted meat and spices down the grand staircase into the dining hall. A long oak table was set for two illuminated purely by candlelight. Before her was a feast perfectly cooked beef, Wellington roasted root vegetables, fresh artisanal bread, and more of that rich, intoxicating wine. Dominic stood by the fireplace watching her enter. His amber eyes dilated, tracking her every movement. "Emerald suits you," he breathed, stepping forward to pull out her chair. "You look like royalty." Penelope sat, her cheeks flushing. "Mr. Croft." "Dominic, please." "Dominic," she corrected. "I don't understand any of this. Why are you doing this for a complete stranger? And you knew my name. You knew about Chad." Dominic took the seat opposite her. He didn't have a plate. He just rested his chin on his steepled fingers, watching her with that intense, predatory focus. "Eat first, Penelope. You must be famished." Despite her anxiety, the food smelled too good to resist. She took a bite, and it was heavenly. She ate self-consciously at first, remembering Chad's disgust at her appetite. But when she glanced up, Dominic wasn't looking at her with disgust. He was watching her eat with deep, genuine satisfaction, almost as if her pleasure was feeding him. "Chad Montgomery is a fool," Dominic said suddenly, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. "A weak, pathetic boy who fears real womanhood. He preferred the sharp, hollow angles of his new colleague because he lacks the strength to handle a woman of substance. You are lush, Penelope. You are a Renaissance painting brought to life. Soft, vibrant, and utterly captivating." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes again, but this time they weren't from sorrow. No man had ever spoken to her like this. No man had ever looked at her curves and called her a masterpiece. "Who are you?" she whispered. Dominic stood up slowly. He walked over to a heavy velvet drape covering a massive frame on the wall and pulled it back. Penelope gasped. It was an oil painting dated 1892. The woman in the painting wore a Victorian gown of emerald green. She had Penelope's dark hair, Penelope's full figure, and Penelope's exact, bewildered expression. Below the portrait, a gold plaque read, "My eternal queen. I am a man who lost his heart over a century ago," Dominic said softly, stepping up behind her chair. Penelope could feel the unnatural chill radiating from his body. "When you died of a fever in Paris, I tore the city apart. I have waited lifetimes for your soul to return to a body I could claim. And when I finally found you, you were shackled to a parasite who made you hate the very vessel I worship." Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked from the painting to Dominic. She noticed it then, the way the candlelight didn't seem to reflect in his eyes, the way he hadn't taken a single breath since she sat down. As he smiled down at her, his lips parted, just enough to reveal the sharp, lethal points of elongated fangs. Panic should have seized her, but it didn't. Instead, an intoxicating wave of power washed over her. You're a vampire," she breathed. Dominic knelt beside her chair, taking her warm hand in his, freezing one, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "I am the king of the Eastern Coven, and you, Penelope, are my mate. I watched him break your heart tonight. I watched him make you weep." A low, guttural howl suddenly echoed from outside the dining room windows, shaking the glass. It was followed by a chorus of terrifying, unnatural snarls, the sounds of massive beasts tearing at their chains. Penelope jumped, looking toward the window. In the darkness of the estate grounds, she saw dozens of pairs of glowing, blood-red eyes pacing in the shadows. They were dogs, but monstrously large, built like tanks, with jaws meant to crush bone. "My hounds," Dominic explained casually, his thumb stroking the soft flesh of her wrist. "They are quite restless tonight. They haven't fed on fresh meat in weeks." He looked up at her, his amber eyes flashing with a violent, possessive fury. "Say the word, my queen. Say the word, and I will have my men collect Chad Montgomery from his little Manhattan apartment. I will bring him here, and we will watch him run." Penelope stared through the rain-streaked glass at the glowing demonic eyes pacing in the shadows of the estate. The primal human part of her brain screamed at the sight of the massive, unnatural beasts. Yet an unfamiliar venomous thrill coiled in her stomach. She turned back to Dominic. He was still kneeling, perfectly still, his amber eyes completely locked onto hers, waiting for her command. "No," Penelope whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. Dominic's sharp brow furrowed in mild disappointment. "You wish to show him mercy after he drained your finances and crushed your spirit. Death is too quick," she clarified, her tone hardening. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, the gorgeous emerald silk clinging to her curves, the flush of vitality returning to her cheeks. "He humiliated me publicly because he thought I was beneath him. He thought I was a stepping stone. If you kill him tonight, he dies thinking he was the victor. I want him to realize exactly what he threw away. I want him to watch me rise, and I want him to lose everything he values." Dominic's lips curled into a terrifying, breathtaking smile. He rose smoothly to his feet, kissing her forehead with lips as cold as ice. "Brilliant and ruthless. You are exactly the woman I lost a century ago. It shall be done, Penelope." Over the next month, the secluded Gothic estate transformed into Penelope's personal sanctuary. Dominic spared no expense in treating her like the deity he believed her to be. Her wardrobe was replaced entirely with custom couture that celebrated her lush figure rather than hiding it. Tailors from Milan arrived via private helicopter to drape her in silks, velvets, and heavy brocades. She dined on decadent feasts, drank wine older than the nation itself, and spent her evenings reading in the sprawling firelit library, while Dominic watched her with unwavering, intoxicating adoration. Their bond deepened in the shadows of the mansion. Dominic introduced her to the true nature of his world. He didn't turn her, not yet, but he shared his blood with her. Just a few drops mixed into her evening wine. The effects were instantaneous. Her senses sharpened, her skin practically glowed with ethereal radiance, and the lingering fatigue of her past life vanished entirely. She was evolving into something untouchable. Meanwhile, 50 miles south in Manhattan, Chad Montgomery's meticulously curated life was violently unraveling. It started with a routine audit at his prestigious law firm, Caldwell and Finch. Harrison Caldwell, the ruthless managing partner, called Chad into his glass-walled office on a rainy Tuesday morning. "Montgomery, sit down," Harrison ordered, tossing a thick financial dossier onto his desk. "We have a severe problem." Chad's arrogant smirk faltered as he looked at the files. "Sir, is this about the Peterson merger?" "This is about the $300,000 missing from the Peterson escrow account," Harrison barked. "Money that was inexplicably routed through a shell corporation before landing directly in your private offshore account." Chad's blood ran cold. He had indeed skimmed the money. Keeping up with Jessica, a woman born into generational wealth, was impossible on a junior associate's salary. He had bought her a Cartier watch, funded weekend trips to St. Bart's, and leased a penthouse he couldn't afford. But he had covered his tracks perfectly. There was no way Harrison could have found it. "That's a mistake, Harrison," Chad stammered, sweating through his custom shirt. "I was framed. Let me look at the routing numbers." "Save it for the federal prosecutors, Chad. You're fired. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building." By noon, Chad was standing on the sidewalk with a cardboard box, his career obliterated. When he called Jessica for comfort, her response was ice cold. "You're broke under federal investigation, and frankly, Chad, you're bad for my brand. Lose my number." Desperate facing prison time and entirely out of funds, Chad realized he had only one lifeline left, Penelope. He still had the login credentials to their old joint checking account. If he could just borrow a few thousand, he could hire a defense attorney. When he logged into the banking app from a cheap diner, he nearly dropped his phone. The account balance, which usually hovered around a meager $400, now read $15 million. Chad blinked. He refreshed the app. The number remained. A massive wire transfer had cleared weeks ago from a holding company called Croft Enterprises. Greed instantly overshadowed his panic. Penelope was rich, unfathomably rich, and since her name was on the account, he convinced himself he was entitled to a cut for putting up with her for 3 years. He used his remaining cash to hire a private investigator to track down where the wire came from. The trail led Chad to the social event of the decade, the Winter Solstice Gala, hosted by the elusive billionaire philanthropist Dominic Croft, held at the Pierre Hotel. Chad snuck into the gala through the service elevators, wearing his only remaining clean tuxedo. The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and old money. But the moment he stepped onto the floor, the entire room seemed to fade away as he caught sight of the woman standing at the top of the grand staircase. It was Penelope. She was unrecognizable, yet undeniably her. She wore a breathtaking blood-red velvet gown that hugged every curve, the bodice dripping in actual rubies. Her dark hair cascaded over her bare shoulders in loose romantic waves. She radiated raw, intimidating power. She wasn't just beautiful. She was a goddess, holding court. Standing beside her, his hand possessively resting on the small of her back, was the most intimidatingly handsome man Chad had ever seen. Chad felt a sickening wave of jealousy and entitlement. Pushing past a group of startled socialites, he marched toward the staircase. "Penny, Chad," shouted his voice, cracking the elegant ambiance of the room. "Penelope." Penelope turned slowly. When she saw Chad disheveled, desperate and pathetic, a slow, wicked smile spread across her ruby-painted lips. She didn't shrink back. She didn't cross her arms to hide her stomach. She stood tall a queen, looking down at a peasant. "Chad, whore," she said, her voice echoing perfectly in the sudden hush of the ballroom. "How remarkably bold of you to crash an invite-only event. Did Caldwell and Finch teach you that before they fired you for embezzlement?" Whispers erupted across the ballroom. Chad turned bright red. "I need to talk to you," Chad demanded, trying to march up the stairs. But two massive security guards men with pale skin and eerily glowing eyes stepped in his path, crossing their arms. "You owe me Penelope. That 15 million in the account, half of that is mine. I supported you. I loved you." Dominic chuckled. The sound was low, dark, and sent a shiver down the spine of every human in the room. He stepped forward, looking down at Chad like one looks at a cockroach. "You supported her?" Dominic purred, his ancient accent dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You drained her dry. You insulted her vessel. You threw her into the freezing rain because she didn't fit into the pathetic microscopic box of your own insecurities." "Who the hell are you?" Chad spat, stepping back as Dominic's imposing shadow fell over him. "I am the man who gave her the world," Dominic replied softly. "And you are the fool who is about to be completely erased from it." Before Chad could process the threat, a familiar figure stepped out from behind Dominic's imposing frame. It was Jessica. She was wearing a sleek black dress, but upon her collarbone rested a heavy silver pendant bearing the wolf crest of the Croft estate. Chad gasped. "Jessica, what are you doing with him?" Jessica didn't look at Chad with the haughty arrogance of a corporate lawyer. She looked at him with the cold detachment of an apex predator. Her eyes flashed briefly, catching the chandelier light in a way that made them glow a feral, unnatural amber. "Did you honestly believe a woman of my pedigree would look twice at a mediocre, spineless boy with bad credit?" Jessica sneered, her voice layered with supernatural compulsion. "My king commanded me to sever your ties to our queen. You were a test, Chad. A test to see if you were worthy of Penelope's devotion. You failed spectacularly. Skimming the escrow account, sir. That was just my suggestion. You were the one foolish enough to actually steal the money." Chad's mind short-circuited. He had been played. From the very beginning, his new relationship, his financial ruin, his public disgrace, it had all been orchestrated by the towering nightmare standing on the stairs. Panic overtook reason. In a blind fit of enraged desperation, Chad lunged forward, slipping past the guards, and grabbed Penelope's wrist, yanking her hard. "You set me up! You fat, vindictive—" Crack. The sound of shattering bone echoed like a gunshot. Chad screamed, dropping to his knees. Dominic hadn't just intercepted him. He had materialized between them with impossible blinding speed, crushing Chad's wrist in his pale hand. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. He leaned down his face, inches from Chad's sweating, agonized face, and let his fangs drop. "You touched my queen." Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with demonic fury. A fatal error. The ballroom erupted into chaos, but Penelope didn't flinch. She watched with cold satisfaction as Dominic's guards dragged the weeping, broken man out of the hotel. Dominic turned to her, smoothing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch instantly becoming gentle. "Are you ready to go home, my love?" he asked. Penelope nodded, a dark fire dancing in her eyes. "Yes. It's time for the hunt." The rain was falling in sheets over the Hudson Valley when Chad regained consciousness. He was lying face down in thick, freezing mud. He gasped, spitting dirt from his mouth and clutching his shattered wrist. He scrambled to his feet, disoriented. He was surrounded by dense, ancient woods. The only source of light was the towering Gothic mansion, looming a few hundred yards away on a hill. On the master balcony, under the shelter of a stone gargoyle, stood Penelope and Dominic. Penelope was holding a crystal goblet of dark, rich wine. She looked down at him, an untouchable deity dispensing judgment. "Penelope." Chad shrieked the rain, plastering his hair to his face. "Please, I'm sorry, I'll do anything. Please don't do this." Penelope took a slow sip of her wine. She remembered the 3 years of starvation diets he forced on her. She remembered the gaslighting, the sneers the night he left her weeping at Le Bernardin. She felt no pity, only a profound, cleansing sense of closure. She turned to Dominic, her dark eyes locking with his amber ones. "Release them," she commanded. Dominic raised a hand and snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the estate's iron gates, the iron chains fell with a heavy metallic clatter. The night air was instantly shattered by a cacophony of guttural snarls and the thunderous pounding of massive paws hitting the wet earth. Chad froze, his eyes widening in absolute terror. Emerging from the tree line were a dozen monstrous hounds. They were the size of lions, their coats pitch black and matted with rain, their jaws dripping with anticipation. Their eyes glowed like burning coals in the darkness. "Run, Chad!" Dominic's voice boomed, projecting across the grounds with supernatural force. "It makes the meat taste better." Chad screamed and bolted into the woods. He ran blindly, tearing his expensive trousers on thorny brambles, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He could hear them behind him, the snapping of branches, the heavy, wet breathing, the horrifyingly coordinated flanking maneuvers of apex predators, hunting a remarkably weak prey. He didn't make it 100 yards. Penelope didn't look away when the first hound lunged from the darkness, tackling Chad to the ground. She didn't flinch when his screams were abruptly cut short by the wet, sickening sound of tearing flesh and snapping bone. She watched until the forest grew silent again, save for the rain and the sounds of a feast. Dominic wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her lush body against his cold, hard chest. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her intoxicating scent. "He is gone," Dominic murmured against her skin. "And you are free." Penelope leaned back into his embrace, feeling the first sharp prick of his fangs against her pulse point. She didn't pull away. She welcomed the bite, welcoming the eternal darkness, power, and devotion that came with it. Chad had dumped a chubby, insecure girl in a restaurant, but he had died feeding the hounds of a vampire queen. If you loved Penelope's savage revenge and her dark, steamy romance with the vampire king, smash that like button. Would you have shown Chad mercy, or did he get exactly what he deserved for body-shaming his loyal girlfriend? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic romance stories every single week. See you next time.